They said justice had been served that day. That Eli Thompson, the elder brother of James, had stolen 3 horses, shot a rancher, and brought lawlessness to a good town. But what they didn't see, what no one cared to mention, was the small boy crouched behind the wagon near the hanging post, fists clenched, watching his only family sway in the wind. That boy, James, disappeared after that. Some said he ran north with a railroad crew. Others thought he died in the winter freeze. But 20 years later, as the town of Black Hollow baked under the July sun, a stranger rode in on a dust-covered horse. Tall, lean, with ice-gray eyes and a name no one remembered. But he remembered every face on Main Street, especially the man who pulled the lever. Her smile wasn't supposed to matter. The daughter of Sheriff Wyman Calloway had a reputation. Grace was smart, refined, with a kindness that made even the drunkest cowboy sit a little straighter in her presence. She ran the town's new schoolhouse, but didn't belong to it. She looked at the sky like it had secrets. And when James saw her, for the first time in decades, something in him broke. Not out of pain, but confusion. How could the daughter of the man he hated most look like forgiveness? Their first few encounters were brief. At the general store, at the watering trough, at the chapel ruins by the river. He told himself to look away. But her smile wasn't supposed to matter. And still, it did. Beneath the blood-orange sunset of Black Hollow, as the heat of the day slowly melted into the rustle of prairie winds, James sat alone near the edge of a dry creek bed. His horse grazed nearby, unbothered by the silence. A small fire crackled beside him, just enough to boil coffee, not enough to give away his position. He moved deliberately, with the precision of a man who had learned to survive alone for far too long. But tonight, his hands were unsteady. He reached into his stole bag, pulling out a weathered leather notebook tied shut with a piece of twine. The corners were curled, and the cover was scarred with years of dirt and blood and fire. Inside were names, 12 of them, some written carefully, others scribbled in anger. Names of men who had once cheered, jeered, or voted for his brother's death. One name always sat at the top, circled and underlined so many times the page was nearly torn. Sheriff Wyman Calloway. But it wasn't just a list. It was a contract. A vow. Each man crossed out meant a story had ended. Some in a poker brawl gone wrong, others through carefully staged accidents along remote trails. James had spent the better part of the last decade carrying out justice the way the West understood it, through silence, grit, and a .44 holstered just above his right hip. Every time he crossed out a name, he felt 1 ounce lighter. But the ledger never made him whole. He stared down at the page now, his thumb brushing across the final name. It was still uncrossed, still breathing, still walking Main Street as if he hadn't murdered a man with a crooked trial and a coward's smile. James gritted his teeth, flipping the page to the back cover. That's where he had written something months ago, just after arriving in Black Hollow under an alias. You finish the list, or the list finishes you. But he hadn't written anything new in over a week, because now, he didn't know what to write. Because now, there was her. Grace Calloway, the sheriff's daughter. She of the warm hands and sky-colored eyes. She of the lingering glances and unguarded kindness. She had never known his name, his real name, and yet she spoke to him like she knew his soul. That, more than anything, terrified him. She didn't belong in the same breath as that ledger. She didn't belong in the same memory as Eli's hanging. And yet, against his own will, he had carved her into the margins of his vengeance. Her presence blurred the lines between justice and absolution, between duty and longing. And in the middle of that blur stood James, paralyzed. A week ago, she had met him at the old schoolhouse ruins, carrying 2 jars of canned peaches. For your travels, she had said with a soft smile. She had no idea he wasn't going anywhere. He had meant to say thank you. Instead, he stared. She smelled of lavender and wood smoke. She laughed once, nervously. And then, as if unsure why, she had placed a hand on his chest, right over the place where that cursed ledger was tucked inside his coat. He had flinched, violently. She didn't ask why. And now, tonight, her face haunted him worse than any of the dying men in that book. The fire cracked, spitting embers into the night. James closed the notebook. Slowly, as if it might explode. He couldn't bring himself to add Grace's name. Not under targets. Not under witnesses. Not even under mistakes. But still, she lived inside the ledger now, not in ink, but in the hesitation of his hand. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver ring. Eli's ring. He'd taken it from his brother's finger the day they buried him in the shallow canyon just east of Carson's Pass. It had never fit right. Too loose, too cold. But James kept it anyway. A reminder. A compass. He turned it in his fingers now, eyes dull with memory. Eli had told him once, "You'll fall in love one day, Jimmy. And she'll either save you, or be the reason you finish what I couldn't." James didn't know if Grace was saving him, but he knew she made revenge feel heavier. And for the first time since he'd returned, he didn't know what he wanted more, justice or peace. A breeze shifted through the cottonwoods nearby, carrying the scent of dry grass and lilac. He looked up, startled. She was there. Grace. Standing at the edge of his firelight, cloak wrapped around her shoulders, eyes soft with worry. "I followed the trail," she said quietly. "I brought you supper. Thought you might be out here." He couldn't speak. He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't tell the truth. "I should go," she murmured, sensing his tension. "I didn't mean to intrude." "No," he said suddenly, voice thick. "Stay. Just sit a while." She hesitated, then sat on a flat rock across from him. She handed him a wrapped biscuit. He took it with hands that still shook. They didn't speak for minutes. The fire did the talking. Two souls caught in the silence between rage and something tender. And as she sat there, warming her fingers, not knowing the book that lay beside her feet, James realized something that shook him to his core. He couldn't finish the ledger. Not if it meant her tears. The town of Black Hollow had changed in 20 years. New storefronts, painted shutters, a schoolhouse, a proper telegraph office. But Sheriff Wyman Calloway hadn't changed at all. His face was still as stern and proud as it had been the day he stood atop the gallows platform, reading the verdict against Eli Thompson without a quiver in his voice. Time hadn't softened him. It had only hardened his edges, like iron left in the fire too long. And he had an eye for ghosts. He first noticed the stranger's eyes, grey, distant, far too sharp for a man claiming to be a land scout from Abilene. Then it was the way he handled his horse, like someone trained to run not from wolves, but from people. And finally, that scar. A long, pale slice just below the man's right ear. He remembered it clearly. The little brother, sobbing in the crowd, caught and dragged away when Eli swung. A boy with fire in his scream and blood on his face from fighting off the deputy who tried to hold him back. Wyman had let him go. Thought he'd die in the plains. Thought time would erase the past. But time doesn't erase vengeance. It only lets it ferment. Wyman knew who he was now. The boy had returned as a man, with a jaw like carved stone and death in his walk. But he didn't move yet. No, Wyman had always been patient. Lawmen had to be. He decided to wait, to watch. And that patience paid off. Because the girl, the only soft thing in his world, had started to change. Grace came home quieter, her eyes distracted. Her dresses no longer matched, and she'd forgotten the Sunday sermons twice. She was reading poetry again. And worst of all, she was humming. She hadn't hummed since her mother died 5 years ago. Wyman watched her, and the fire in his gut rose like old coals being stoked. He didn't ask. He didn't accuse. But one night, as she left the house after supper with a basket of preserves and a nervous glance back toward the window, Wyman slipped out the back and followed. He stayed far enough behind that she never heard him. Grace moved quickly through the trees, past the livery, down the crooked path toward the dry creek bed where few dared camp. The moon hung low, cloaked in clouds. Coyotes called out in the distance, and Wyman's boots didn't make a sound. Then he saw her. She stepped into the clearing, her silhouette soft against the flicker of a small fire. And across from her, on a log with a tin cup in hand, sat the man with the scar. "James!" Her laugh echoed, soft and startled, like she hadn't meant it. She reached for something in her basket, a cloth-wrapped loaf. He took it. Their hands touched. And Wyman felt something crack inside of him. Not because he was jealous. Not because he feared for her safety. But because he finally understood. James hadn't come for a bullet. He'd come for something far more dangerous. For redemption through his daughter's heart. Wyman didn't confront him that night. Didn't call him out. No, a sheriff couldn't act on impulse. He returned home alone, sat at his desk, and stared at the single photograph he still kept, Eli Thompson's hanging. A black and white blur of faces, smiling, shouting, some solemn. James was there, half visible, caught just at the edge of the crowd, eyes burning. A ghost made of sorrow. The next day, Wyman wrote a note in sharp handwriting and pinned it to James' saddle outside the feed store. It read, "He knows who you are. Meet me where it ended." James didn't hesitate. He rode out at dusk, the sky like bruised leather above him. The trail led toward the old execution hill, where the town's justice had once been carried out. The gallows stood in ruins, half-collapsed wood, iron hinges rusted, rope long since rotted away. It was a skeleton of memory, and James felt every bone in his body tighten. Wyman stood under the frame, hands behind his back. He didn't draw his rifle, though it leaned against a post within reach. "You took your time," the sheriff said. James dismounted, boots crunching on dry gravel. "I thought you'd be armed. I thought you'd already tried something by now." "I was going to," James admitted, voice low. "I came here with a list." "Your brother wasn't innocent," Wyman replied. "He confessed to horse theft and left a rancher with a bullet in the gut. You think I took pleasure in hanging him?" "No," James said, stepping closer. "I think you slept just fine after." Wyman didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed. "And what's stopping you now? If revenge is still hot in your belly, take it. But know this, I have nothing left but my daughter, and you've already touched what matters most to me." James froze. The words stung like a whip, not because they were wrong, but because they revealed what he had become. A man torn between fire and grace. He looked at the rope beam, still casting a long shadow in the moonlight. His brother had died here. But maybe, just maybe, something else could end here too, his hunger for blood. "You hanged my brother," James said quietly. "But I've been hanging ever since." Then he turned his back on the gallows. And on the past. Wyman didn't call after him. He just stood there, alone, listening to the wind creak the old noose hook. The wind howled across Black Hollow like it was trying to erase the town from the map. Storm clouds gathered low and dark as James packed the last of his things into his thul bag. He stood beneath the cottonwood tree where he had camped so many nights in silence, firelight dancing over old regrets. But tonight, there was no fire. Just ashes and the weight of everything unsaid. Grace hadn't come. He hadn't expected her to. Not after what her father must have told her. After all, how do you explain to the woman you love that you came to town with the intention of killing her father? How do you explain that your love bloomed in the shadows of a gallows? James had tried to write it all down. A letter, just in case. But every time he pressed the pencil to paper, nothing came. No words. Just images. Her laugh. Her hands. Her eyes the color of a calm sky before a storm. So he did what broken men do. He ran. He tightened the cinch on his saddle, patted the mare's side, and swung up, shoulders sagging. He hadn't crossed off Wyman Calloway's name. Not out of mercy. Out of exhaustion. Out of love. Out of something that felt heavier than revenge ever had. As he nudged the horse forward toward the pass, thunder rumbled far off. A few drops of rain darkened the earth. Then he heard it. "James!" He stopped, slowly turned in the saddle. She was there. Grace. Wind in her hair, coat clutched tight at the neck, cheeks flushed from a sprint. She had tears in her eyes and mud on her boots and a piece of torn paper in her hand. "I found your ledger," she said, breathless. "I know who you are." James's heart stopped, but she didn't move away. She stepped closer. "You came here to kill him," she said, voice shaking. "But you didn't. You could have, and you didn't." James dismounted, silent. "I hated you for lying to me," she whispered. "But I hated myself more for still loving you after I found out the truth." He winced. "Then why are you here?" She held up the paper. It was the last page of his ledger. The one that read, "You finish the list, or the list finishes you." "I read this," she said, "and I realize something." She stepped closer, until the rain began to fall between them like a curtain. "You didn't finish the list," she whispered. "So maybe that means you're done being that man." James looked down, ashamed. "Or maybe," she said, "you were never meant to finish it." Her hand reached for his, and for a long moment, He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He had been so full of rage for so long that peace felt like a betrayal. But her hand was warm, steady. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "But I want to find out, if you'll stay." Thunder cracked, loud and deep. He looked toward the pass, the open road, the storm, the life he had always known. Then he looked back at her. And for the first time in 20 years, he chose not to run. He reached into his coat, pulled out the ledger, and handed it to her. She took it gently, like it was a relic from a war long over. Then he struck a match and held it to the corner. Flame curled around the edges, orange and gold. It licked the names, the pain, the blood-soaked promises. Page after page turned to ash as the rain fell harder. Grace watched silently as the fire devoured the last of his ghosts. And when it was done, he looked at her. "I don't know how to be anything else," he said. "Except broken." She shook her head, eyes wet. "No," she whispered. "You're not broken. You're just unfinished." They married in the small church at the edge of town, where the wood still smelled like pine and the pews creaked with age. Wyman walked her down the aisle, stone-faced and silent, but his eyes glistened when he handed her off. He never said much to James after that. Not about the past, not about Eli. But sometimes, they'd share a long look across the Sunday supper table. And sometimes, that was enough. James opened a livery, fixed wagons, raised horses. He never wore a gun again. The townspeople accepted him slowly. Some never did. But most could see the way he looked at Grace. Like a man watching the sun rise after a lifetime of night. And when people asked where he came from, or what brought him to Black Hollow, he'd only ever say, "I came to bury a ghost. But I found something worth living for instead." The gallows rotted away completely one spring. Grass grew over the hill where so much pain had been planted. And a single wildflower bloomed beneath the post, delicate and purple, right where Eli had once stood. Some scars don't fade, but they stop bleeding. And James learned that love doesn't erase the past. It just gives you a reason to stop rewriting it.